G'day guys, Bsquiklehausen here, and welcome back to Springwood. How'd I do?
That's so good, man. Like, you nailed it. I think you sound more Australian than I do.
I don't think I can argue with that. Maybe.
Man, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
If you guys are listening at home and wondering why Jay is now on my channel after having strict host last weekend, well, I've got Jay because he has very kindly made some trains to finally match the Springwood 1987 look. He has made some passenger trains and he's also made some super retro cargo trains that we're going to look at today too. In terms of what we're building though today, and I'm going to continue fleshing out Santa Clara's suburbs that we were building in the last episode. So they will kind of be sneaking into the cinematics in between the discussion that Jay and I have over the next 15 or so minutes. But let's quickly jump into some of the trains that you have made for Springwood. And we're going to start with this one, which I think it's probably going to get the most airtime in Springwood. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Cool, yeah, so that one, I think you're probably right in giving that the most airtime in Springwood, like using it the most, just because it's got the engine on each end, so it's not going to look stupid backing up through the whole city.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just kind of a very generic, I don't want to say commuter train, just because it's not quite that. You can see the one car in the middle has fewer windows. It's like a cafe car, so it's a little nicer than your normal commuter train or like a metro train even. But it's one of these, it's like a sort of intercity, like a regional train. I based this off of one that ran between San Diego and LA back in the 80s. I think it's missing one car and has that second engine on the end. But I think it's a really good fit for Springwood. It's got the classic look. So CityLink is obviously based on Amtrak, which is the kind of main passenger train company in the US.
I think it's going to fit a lot better than those Japanese trains that have been driving around Springwood for the last couple of months. Jay's actually been hassling me for ages saying that I really need to change it up, and now that I've got my own fleet driving around, it makes a lot of sense to finally change and get some better trains coming along.
Yeah, I think they'll look a lot better, particularly because it's like good old classic American diesel trains and things. Like that's very, very 80s. Is a bunch of diesel smoke coming out of the tops of these trains. They plow through neighborhoods.
On the complete end of the spectrum, so we've got our trains that we're going to be seeing a lot of driving around the city, connecting up Palmdale to the university to the main city. On the other end, what do we have here?
Oh yeah, so this is your long distance train. It's got four locomotives just for extra power and redundancy in case one breaks. And then a bunch of these huge double-decker cars, and these are they're really in real life there'll only be like 3 or 4 trains made up of these per day, when there could be a few dozen of the inner city one. This would be the sort of train you'd take through Arrowhead Junction back in 1987 to get out to Springwood.
That's cool.
Yeah, in fact, Arrowhead Junction used the modern version of this train, the modern model that I have already up on my workshop. So,
right. It's awesome. I love the different layers and stuff, and like the different carts you got stuck on the back. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Tell me about this.
These cars on the back are actually freight cars. They'd be used for like express freight or mail in particular. And it was a very lucrative thing for Amtrak and for CityLink back in kind of from the 80s all the way through the 2000s. They've stopped doing that recently. I think they've lost the contract for mail and it's just not quite as popular anymore. But you end up, it's just such a distinctive look. So whenever I think like classic Amtrak, which of course I get to rip straight off for classic CityLink, it's a whole bunch of these F40 locomotives, which are the kind that I modeled, on the front, and then a whole bunch of these box cars out on the back, and then double-decker cars with red, white, and blue stripes in the middle. So this is kind of the best, my favorite look, and it's a classic. I had a model of this sort of thing when I was a kid growing up, and I've got a model of the modern version of it now.
Yeah, right. It's awesome, man. I love this one. And just what is this one at the front?
That's just the baggage car. It's where you'd be able to check your bags. So like in an airplane, you check your bag, it goes under the floor. In a train, it goes in its car on the front.
What is this one here?
That one here is kind of it's another version of the inner city one. so it doesn't have the engine on the rear, and it has a baggage car at the front. So it's for kind of slightly longer journeys, but still nothing that needs like a full dining car for meals and like a lounge car and sleeping cars and things. It's just kind of a bunch of coach seats and a cafe.
Yeah, and what else do we have?
That one right there is just a shorter version of that long distance train. It's designed to kind of cut down to fit in the stations. That one's a little bit prototypic. It's a little off prototypically. I don't think any of those run to LA in particular, at least right now. But you can just imagine like that would be the long distance train if they couldn't sell many tickets.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's one thing that's nice about trains. You just don't need to bring those cars. So it's just a nice compact version. That one's also made if you ever want to use one of those kind of in the city just to get more variation. I wouldn't necessarily, but that one will fit in the city skyline stations much better than the long one.
Very cool. And speaking of long ones, then we've got one more to look at here.
Aha! So this one I'd only really include in Springwood. This one I can't wait to include in Gramercy if I ever do like a throwback 80s episode of that, yeah. Which that would actually be a ton of fun. But I wanted to do this just because I had all the car types lying around. But you can see the different shapes of all the cars are because some are older. They actually predate the founding of Amtrak, and they come from other railroads and were repainted. And then the rounder ones are newer, and I just really like the shape. It's super distinctive because Amtrak used these trains all the way from their founding all the way through like 2015, 2014, which is crazy to me. But it's just these. I mean, some of these cars were 50 years old, and they're older than the company. So it's just a distinctive look seeing the sleeper cars be the older style as well as the dining car and everything. So I really wanted to include that as well. So that's kind of an East Coast long distance train. Who knows? Maybe there's a very low bridge just outside of Springwood or something that they can't raise, so they've got to run the single decker trains.
Oh, hey man, this is the job for the people writing the wiki, and definitely jump into the wiki and start churning out some stories behind these trains. Jay's put a lot of work into these. They look amazing, and I think all of the track work now that we can start working on in terms of the wiki. So definitely jump on there and we can do that. We've also got some cargo trains to look at, yeah?
Yeah, so these were, again, a lot of fun to make, and it turns out when I thought like freight trains and when I was making my other sets, I had a really modern tilt, so it was really fun to get to go back and figure out like, oh, that's how they built it back in the 80s. Like that's the style, and these are the engines they used and the types of car and everything. So we've got three new railroads. The Arrowhead Western is old, I guess. I mean, you've seen it before, so those kind of fit in with the current stuff. But they're all very West Coast focused. The Springwood line is the Santa Fe. The Coast Range is the Southern Pacific, which we've actually seen before in the that old steam train I have. And then I have the Alta, which is based on a friend's model train set, or model train layout. And he's got this incredibly well-detailed and well-researched backstory into how this railroad runs. I figured, like, you know what? Maybe that like model train world can fit into this City Skylines like model city world too. So that's kind of there for him, which is super cool. And it matches perfectly. I just love the paint job. I feel like the second I like saw it, I'm like, man, that would be cool for Springwood. It just fits the kind of vibe. What do you think?
Yeah, man, like super bright, out there colors, bold letters. It's great. It's perfect.
Yeah, so that's a ton of fun. So I've got a couple. I mean, you can see it's the Alta stuff. So there's like the big block letters on the couple cars and things too.
Yeah.
So looking through, you can see I have a ton of box cars, and these are all based pretty closely off of real life cars. I spent a lot of time researching these trains on YouTube and photos and videos of them. And in fact, actually almost all of the consists, so the actual trains that will spawn, are as close as I could get, like car for car, or sometimes I mixed and match a few actual videos I saw on YouTube of these trains. So I just searched for like Southern Pacific, Los Angeles, 1987, and I'd find like a video of a little local train puttering through Anaheim. I'm like, perfect, that'll work. And I have that like almost car for car in here.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, and I'd never really done anything this close to real life detail before like that. I try to make really sure to get the feel right, and these trains existed. 1987 was kind of before the mass containerization we see today. So you'd end up with a lot of trains that were just a ton of boxcars, and then they'd eventually have to go in the city. They'd go to a yard, and then all the cars would be sorted out and sorted back into little local trains. And you'd have full train cars being delivered to like warehouses and things and industries that would take like a full boxcar of stuff, or a full like hopper car of cement, or a refrigerator car full of whatever. So I have those. I mean, I've got I don't think I really have a cement hopper, but I've got the Coast Range and Alta cars here you see are hoppers. That yellow car that says Cold Standard is based off of a real insulated boxcar for food products, which is solid cold and then solid gold. And I'm like, you know what? I can make a joke like that. Cold Standard. And they look just like that in real life too. I copied
That's such a cool design, man.
The
It's
3D
like,
text. I know, it's just so perfect for kind of that vintage 80s vibe, and it's such a wacky, out there look that I just love so much.
It is. How do they think this was going to look cool? Like, I just don't get it. It's like the whole of the 80s was like just a massive joke.
I mean, they were right. That solid cold car still looks good today. And I mean, that getting to do that Cold Standard car, I'm like, hell yeah, that looks awesome. In the late 80s, this was before a lot of these railroads merged into each other. So you had a lot of this awesome, like, redundant infrastructure where you'd have, like, I think in LA, it's on different sides of the LA River. You have 3 different major rail yards in the 80s for 3 different railroads. And now it's like one railroad has their yard there.
Right.
Which, I mean, you have a ton of extra space now, which is great and efficient. It's better for the city and everything. But you'd end up, like, I hope that Springwood, I'll be able to see it, will have a big Arrowhead and Western yard, and that'll be really close to the big Coast Range yard, which will also be close to the Springwood Lines yard and the Alta yard, and all these things will be, like, redundant and all near each other, and you'd be able to have, like, almost on either side of the river, you have 2, like, engine maintenance facilities for all the trains. But they're completely different companies, and you need to have both, or you could have both even, it's competition, it's competitive, and who owned what tracks and which neighborhoods and things, and you don't see that anymore. So that was something I really wanted to make sure was possible for you doing for Springwood. So
yeah, well, I think that's I'm glad you're telling me before we get into that, because down the track when we do start making train lines or these cargo stations along the river, which is one of my biggest, I don't know, I really love seeing that in LA, so I do plan to kind of expand on that.
Awesome, I can't wait to see that. And I'm sure for some of those, like, so if you actually have those tracks in that neighborhood all hooked up properly, I have local trains for some of the railroads and things that'll just look so good on them. So I need to sneak some cargo stations into buildings and things to get that to work. But I've got these, like, really nice, short, like 7-8 car things with one engine. In fact, I have one that the engine's pulling backwards, so it's like it had to shift around the consist and try to pull. So it's running with the cab at the back of the engine, long hood forward. And it's such a cool look, and I'm really excited to see this all take shape, because there's not really anybody else doing retro stuff like back in the 80s, and it's all modern. So if you look like a modern train yard, there's just this one huge one outside of the city. And back in the 80s, they had a bunch of smaller ones inside the city. And you had to figure out how to sort, because you've got trains, and they got built up in the Midwest and came all the way out to the West Coast, and then had to get distributed. Like, you could have a boxcar that gets built up in Chicago and packed up in Chicago, and had to be sorted and routed on multiple trains and end up at the correct warehouse in LA. Like, now you just put it on a truck in Chicago, it would put the container onto a train, the train would drive to the container yard in LA, and then the container would get put onto another truck that would drive. You don't have, like, all this train infrastructure having to get that final last mile.
So cool, man. Yeah, I think I'm gonna really need your help when we start developing that. I might even get you to feature on an episode or two, because
no problem. I
would love you to talk me through how it all works, and so that we can get the whole feel of it accurate. And anyone who's running up the wiki, wants to include, you got to include what Jay's talking about, because it's pretty much spot on with the 80s feel of Springwood. We want to keep within that 80s vibe. So good to have all these trains finally driving around, and I'll definitely include a lot more in the cinematics at the very end. But man, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So for the last part of this episode, it's just going to be me as I talk about what I've been building on screen over the last 20 minutes. And essentially, I've been just fleshing out the suburban area for Santa Clara. And if you missed the last episode of Springwood, we've been working on this suburb based off Venice Beach and Santa Monica in LA. I had Stricktoaster in and he was helping me out, give me some ideas from his drone footage for what this area looks like. I've been really thinking about how much Santa Monica and Venice Beach has changed over the years since the 80s, and trying to think about what this area would have looked like back in 87. And what I'm gathering is it probably would have had less mansions and more smaller cottages. Strict was talking about how even walking around the neighborhoods today, you can still find many smaller cottages. They've been recently really pushed up in the market, I guess, and they're full of brand new appliances and sunroofs and pretty much hot property these days. But back probably in the 80s, it wouldn't have been so much the case. So I'm trying to meet somewhere in the middle, because I did want a bit of gentrification in the area. I wanted some areas looking a bit more affluent than others, and this part of Springwood, it's definitely not Springwood Hills, but it is quite a nice area. So as you can see what I'm doing on screen, I'm placing down some gardens and some nice little neighborhood elements, because I do want to establish the feeling of this area being a strong community, an area that is a neighborhood, not just a mass of houses, but to have the feeling, if you were to live here, you'd know where your school would be, you'd know where you'd buy your groceries, and where certain people might live. So I'm trying to establish that feeling of where people live, and really working on establishing a bit more of a neighborhood feel to it. And I really love doing that. I've spoken about this before, but when I do build in City Skylines, I like to build from neighborhoods rather than just the center of the city, because it makes it feel more organic. That is sort of how cities establish. They expand from neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has its own little feeling to it. And I guess that's where you guys come into play. If you've been totally unaware of the wiki, it is just evolved into the most amazing thing. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. And I need your help, because Springwood these videos are only just one element to the series. The wiki, the whole story behind what we're building, is pretty much the basis of what I've been wanting to establish as this city grows. So if you've got a story behind this area, if you have some ideas, if you want to take some screenshots and talk about some residents that live here, please jump on the wiki and do so, because just commenting below means that they will eventually disappear into the world of YouTube, whereas putting it on the wiki, it's there. So definitely go and check it out, and go and join the discussion, because the Discord chat at the moment is it's really strong, and that wiki chat is really amazing. And it's actually building quite a great community there, and quite a creative community, which is really, really fun to see. And I'm constantly checking it out and finding out what is now established in Springwood, because pretty much they are writing the story. And if you want to jump on board of that, I'd highly suggest you do. So yeah, this whole area is pretty much a booming neighborhood that is pretty much in the transition from small cottages to a more of a higher density of residents. There are some apartment blocks being installed around here, starting to be built around here, and also some mansions that I've been placing down around the riverfront. And I'm going to really expand on those mansions and the apartments in later episodes as I work around the river and the beachfront. They are going to come in the next few episodes. For the time being, I'm just working on this suburb at the moment, and the facilities that sort of work around those suburbs. I also wanted to put down some shops in this episode, but I just ran out of time, so I think that'll be for a later episode. This whole, I reckon for the next 5 episodes, I'm going to work just solely within Santa Clara, tying pretty much everything that I build from things around Santa Monica and Venice Beach, because that is pretty much the sole inspiration for this area. Going back to the trains, there is so much ideas that I already have for the trains in Springwood. Trying to figure out where I'm going to be placing down the lines and where each train is going to service Springwood, and even when I start expanding the industry and the train lines for the industry, where all those cargo trains are going to be spawning around Springwood. So that is very exciting. If you want to jump onto the wiki and also work on that, that'd be awesome. Or if you want to leave a comment below just talking about that, that'd be great. I'd love some suggestions. I'm not a train guy. I love trains, but I don't know anything about them. And even the lines in Springwood are a total mess. I did a share screen with Jay the other night and just showed him all the lines in Springwood, and you know, it's such a friggin' mess. So I really need to work on the lines of Springwood and figure out how Palmdale goes to the downtown and how the airport system works in terms of getting from one side of the river to the other. It's an absolute mess, and if you've got some suggestions, leave them in the comments below. I would really love to read them and get your opinions and suggestions. I can't wait to get into that episode and work around and figure out how everything is connected using Jay's amazing trains. But that is pretty much it for this episode. It's really flown by. It's been an absolute nightmare to edit, but I think it's going to be a pretty good episode nonetheless. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. See you later.